Hello, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, a weekly Torah portion podcast where I read the weekly Torah portion and provide my own personal interpretation based on the text. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Vayechi, which translates to "And he lived," falling on the Shabbat of the 18th of Tevet, 5784, December 30th, 2023. As always, I'd like to remind everybody that I am not a Torah scholar, just somebody who wished to study Torah. As always, you can follow along via Chabad.org. Let's begin. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 47, verse 28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, and Jacob's days, the years of his life, were 147 years. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have now found favor in your eyes, now place your hand beneath my thigh, and you shall deal with me with loving kindness and truth. Do not bury me now in Egypt. I will lie with my forefathers, and you shall carry me out of Egypt, and you shall bury me in their grave." And he said, "I will do as you say." And he said, "Swear to me." So he swore to him, and Israel prostrated himself on the head of the bed. Chapter 48, verse 1. Now it came to pass after these incidents that someone said to Joseph, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took his two sons with him, Manasseh and Ephraim. And someone told Jacob and said, "Behold, your son Joseph is coming to you." And Israel summoned his strength and sat up on the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "Almighty God appeared to me in Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. And he said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and cause you to multiply, and I will make you into a congregation of peoples. And I will give this land to your seed after you for an everlasting inheritance. And now, as for your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt until I came to you to the land of Egypt, they are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine like Reuben and Simeon. But your children, if you beget any after them, shall be yours. By their brothers' names they shall be called in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died to me in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still a stretch of land to come to Ephrat, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrat, which is Bethlehem." Then Israel saw Joseph's sons, and he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God gave me here." So he said, "Now bring them near to me, so that I may bless them." All right, and here we are at the end of the first portion. So Jacob is getting quite old, his days are numbered, and now, as he's getting near his deathbed, he calls out to bless his grandchildren, the sons of Joseph. Now Joseph brings them to come and meet their grandfather, and Jacob, aka Israel, tells Joseph a little bit about his own past, about how he was blessed when he was passing through Luz, and how the promises were made. He also notes the specifics of how his seed after him will receive the land for an everlasting inheritance. And so he basically says, regarding your two sons that were born to you, they will be mine just as your brothers are mine. So just as Reuben and Simeon, so will be Ephraim and Manasseh. And what this really means is Jacob is adopting Ephraim and Manasseh. He's basically adopting his grandchildren to be as his own children for the sake of inheritance. Now, what does this mean? What is the significance of this? Essentially, in doing so, a couple of things. One, he mentions what happened to Rachel. In other words, when they were still on their way coming back from Padan Aram, Rachel died. And so she only was able to have the two children. So now these two grandchildren will basically be kind of like the children that he may have had instead if she had survived. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect to consider here is this idea that comes earlier in the stories when we're talking about Judah's sons. This took place a previous portion, I think 2 portions or 3 portions ago, but basically one of his sons died before he could have a child, and so then his next son, that son's brother, was supposed to basically take care of the wife and make sure that she had a child who would be named his deceased brother's son. So, in essence, the whole point is very similar here. Somebody can be kind of like a stand-in, for lack of a better term, sort of like a sperm donor, but the inheritance will go specifically to the one that's named the official son or whatever. So titles and things like that are important. And in this case, Joseph is basically having his two sons taken up by his father and given a birthright. So instead of it being just straight up from Joseph, this goes to Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's something that is being done for them by their grandfather, and definitely a very different kind of blessing. Also, the fact that they are to be elevated to the same level as his own firstborn children, that's a pretty significant blessing to be giving them, but it also shows just how much he cherished Rachel above all others. Another thing he says is if you have any children after these two, basically they are your children. So they will be the children of Joseph, they will receive the inheritance of Joseph, but Manasseh and Ephraim will receive the inheritance of Jacob. So that's the significance. Now, with this all said, he then sees these for the first time, these two young men, and who are they? And sure enough, Joseph says, these are my sons whom God gave me here, and Israel says, bring them near to me so that I may bless them. Now we move on to the second portion. Chapter 48, verse 10. Now Israel's eyes had become heavy with age, to the extent that he could not see. So he drew them near to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not expected to see even your face, and behold, God has shown me your children too. And Joseph took them out from upon Jacob's knees, and he prostrated himself to the ground. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim at his right, from Israel's left, and Manasseh at his left, from Israel's right, and he brought them near to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and placed it on Ephraim's head, although he was the younger, and his left hand he placed on Manasseh's head. He guided his hands deliberately, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, God who sustained me as long as I am alive until this day, may the angel who redeemed me from all harm bless the youths, and may they be called by my name and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they multiply abundantly like fish in the midst of the land. So, as promised, the blessing is given to the grandchildren, who he's never had the chance to see before. Also, something that I did not mention previously, but this is something I failed to touch on in the first portion. This is a request, a promise being made. Explicitly, you're going to make sure that I get buried where my forefathers were buried, right? So that's a promise that Joseph is asked to swear, and I failed to also mention this previously, but he specifically says, place your hand beneath my thigh, and this is significant. This was done one other time previously. This happens with Abraham talking to Eliezer when he's making an oath about finding a wife for Isaac. The significance of placing the hand beneath the thigh is that it has to do with the circumcision, right? So the circumcision is the covenant between the Lord and these people. So it is considered to be sort of like a holy part of the body. So you're basically making a vow in the presence or beneath this very spiritually significant ritual. So beneath the present of the Brit Milah, the circumcision, that is where this promise was made. And that also kind of ties into everything here. He says, I will do as you say. So this is all tying into why this promise is going to be kept. So back to the second portion. As mentioned, the two sons step forward to meet their grandfather. And not only is he grateful for them and filled with just joy that he was blessed not only to see his son his son Joseph again, but also to meet the grandchildren. And he gives them the blessing, and he places the blessing on an unexpected order, right? So, and we'll go into the specifics here, because basically the firstborn son is supposed to get one blessing and the secondborn another blessing, but Joseph, to his dismay, will find that it is not as he expected. We'll go into the third portion, as these angels are called upon, or the angel is called upon to protect the two youths. Third portion, chapter 48, verse 17. And Joseph saw that his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it displeased him. So he held up his father's hand to remove it from upon Ephraim's head to place it on Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused, and he said, I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will be great. But his younger brother will be greater than he, and his children's fame will fill the nations. So he blessed them on that day, saying, With you Israel will bless, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and like Manasseh. And he placed Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said to Joseph, Behold, I am going to die, and God will be with you, and he will return you to the land of your forefathers. And I have given you one portion over your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. And so, there we have it. The blessing is given to the house of Joseph, to his children, as equals, in a way, to their uncles, but with a special portion, they received the most significant blessing of all. That is the blessing of the angel that protected Jacob in his times of struggle. So he has basically did the usual blessing that happens from father to son. He chose to give it to these two brothers. Now we get into the fourth portion. Oh, also, before I go into the fourth portion, he says, I've given you one portion over your brothers. He also mentions that Ephraim will be greater than Manasseh, even though he's the second born. And again, keep that in mind, that's exactly how he was with his own brother. But also, I took, one portion which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. So, I'm not sure if the Amorite here refers to his uncle, because I think so, but I'm not 100%. So, I hope to find out that information a little bit later. But unfortunately, I'm doing this a little blind, no prior research, so played it by ear, but I'm sure we'll learn soon. So anyway, we go into the fourth portion. Chapter 49, verse 1. Jacob called for his sons and said, Gather, and I will tell you what will happen to you at the end of days. Gather and listen, sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the first of my might. You should have been superior in rank and superior in power. You have the restlessness of water. Therefore, you shall not have superiority, for you ascended upon your father's couch. Then you profaned him who ascended upon my bed. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Stolen instruments are their weapons. Let my soul not enter their council. My honor you shall not join their assembly. For in their wrath they killed a man, and with their will they hamstrung a bull. Cursed be their wrath, for it is mighty, and their anger because it is harsh. I will separate them throughout Jacob, and I will scatter them throughout Israel. Judah, as for you, your brothers will acknowledge you. Your hand will be at the nape of your enemies, and your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. A cub and a grown lion is Judah. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. He crouched, rested like a lion. And like a lion, who will rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the student of the law from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him will be a gathering of peoples. He binds his foal to a vine, and to a tendril he binds his young donkey. He launders his garment with wine, and with the blood of grapes binds his raiment. He is red-eyed from wine, and white-toothed from milk. Zebulun will dwell on the coast of the seas. He will be at the harbor of the ships, and his boundary will be at Zidon. Issachar is a strong-boned donkey lying between the boundaries. He saw a resting place, that it was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and he bent his shoulder to bear burdens, and he became an indentured laborer. Dan will avenge his people, like one, the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a serpent on the road, a viper on the path, which bites the horse's heels so its rider falls backwards. For your salvation I hope, O Lord. So, that ends the fourth portion. What is happening here at the very end of his days? Jacob is now giving a prophecy for his sons. He's been given their destiny for each of the tribes, and now he breaks it down by son. So he starts off with his firstborn, Reuben, and he basically says, Reuben, you should have been number one, you should have stood at the top, but because of your nature and your behavior, you will not. Specifically, he mentions you ascended upon your father's couch, and I think this specifically refers to when he laid with one of the concubines of Jacob by ascending on the couch. Then you profaned him who ascended upon my bed. So perhaps it was sort of a, you did this thing, but then you also denounced the one who did it. So you've basically done that to yourself. Or it's something I don't 100% understand the meaning of. But either way, Reuben's choices in life have cost him this sort of successful blessing that should have been his as the firstborn, but the way he conducted himself, no good. Next up, Simeon and Levi. Stolen instruments are their weapons. Let my soul not enter their council. My honor, you shall not join their assembly. For in their wrath they killed a man, and with their will they hamstrung a bull. What man did they kill? I believe this specifically refers to what happened with Dinah, their sister, when she was to be married off to these many, to this people, and they were supposed to be, joined, and they went ahead, and after they went ahead and circumcised all the men of the people, they went in and they killed them. They took the weapons and they killed them. And so for that misdeed, which caused their father a great deal of strife and also put a target on their entire people's back, they will be punished for that. So they will be spread throughout their people. Particularly Levi, we'll learn more about that. The Levites, this definitely applies. So that's something to keep in mind. Because of your anger and your rashness, they will inherit the consequences. Next up, we have a much less negative blessing, actually a tremendously good one. Judah. Judah will be the king. He will be the one who conquers his enemies, right? The enemy, your hand will be at the nape of your enemies, and your father's sons will prostrate themselves to you. In other words, all of them will be bowing down before you, all your brothers. A cub and a lion groans, Judah. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. He crouched, rested like a lion, and like a lion, who will rouse him? So in other words, for all of his experiences, he matured. And he became greater than he used to be. And he has what it takes to hold the right of hegemony. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the student of the law from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him will be a gathering of people. So, in essence, he's basically saying, Judah, you're going to be the boss. Your descendants, your house will be the king. So, long story short, he's basically telling him all these wonderful things. He launders his garment with wine, so he'll be washing his clothing in wine. Blood of grapes will bind his raiment. I mean, he's going to be living in just this wonderful state of being. His eyes will be red from wine and his white teeth from milk. So he's going to have it all. Then we get into a much more modest blessing, a much more modest prophecy. Zebulun will simply be the coastal people. Issachar is going to be between the boundaries, and basically, he went ahead and said, yeah, this is good enough for me, and so he becomes an indentured laborer and takes the land that he ends up with because, yeah, this is fine. Dan will avenge his people like one, the tribes of Israel. So at some point in time, the people will need avenging, and it will be from the tribe of Dan that it takes place. They will avenge everyone, the tribes of Israel. And for their salvation, I hope, O Lord. So this is just the first of the several brothers, but I think the most significant ones are, of course, those specifically the eldest, Reuben being told, because of your behavior, you should have been number one, but you're not. Judah, on the other hand, a total switch around of being condemned. If we recall, he was lowered in esteem after what happened to Joseph and all the things he's experienced, but ultimately with his lifestyle choices and his maturity, he redeemed himself and showed that he was a man of great character, willing to do whatever it took to fulfill his vow to his father, even becoming a slave if necessary to save little Benjamin. So he definitely redeemed himself from what used to be a rather unsavory character. Also, of course, how he conducted himself with his daughter-in-law, who ultimately, after being denied her right to the last of his sons, took matters into her own hands and sired children with her. So, not that he intended to, but once it happened, he owned up to it and let it be. Issachar, Dan, all these, we see what is theirs. Now we can go ahead and jump into the fifth portion, though. For your salvation, I hope, O Lord. So, Dan being a serpent, he's also saying, he's praying for Dan because they're going to do this stuff, but being a serpent on the road, a viper on the path, that's not exactly a nice thing, but he's still praying for him. On to the fifth portion, chapter 49, Genesis, verse 19. As for Gad, a troop will troop forth from him, and it will troop back in its tracks. From Asher will come rich food, and he will yield regal delicacies. Naphtali is a swift gazelle, he is one who utters beautiful words. A charming son is Joseph, a son charming to the eye. Of the women each one strode along to see him. They heaped bitterness upon him and became quarrelsome. Yea, archers despised him. But his bow was strongly established, and his arms were gilded from the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there he sustained the rock of Israel, from the God of your father. And he will help you, and with the Almighty, and he will bless you with the blessings of the heavens above, the blessings of the deep lying below, the blessings of father and mother. The blessings of your father surpass the blessings of my parents. The ends of the everlasting hills, may they come to Joseph's head and to the crown of the head of the one who was separated from his brothers. So, here we have, Gad is going to, a troop will troop forth from him and it will troop back in its tracks. So, maybe this is going to be some sort of an uprising or a militia that's going to be pushed back. Asher is going to have basically a bountiful harvest, right? They're going to have these delicacies, so that's not a bad outcome for them. Naphtali's a swift gazelle. He is one who utters beautiful words, so perhaps they'll be a diplomatic people or a poetic people. A charming son is Joseph, so this is really a special blessing, a special prayer, a special prophecy, but basically Joseph is indicated to be the chosen one of these sons to receive the greatest blessing of all, in that while Judah is the one who's going to be the king, it looks like on Joseph's head will be the blessing of Israel. He is going to receive, it seems pretty clear that he is the one who received the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph blessing. So, something to keep in mind there. All the wonderful things above and below from father and mother. Joseph, you are my chosen inheritor. And obviously, it's also because he's the one who sustained the house of Israel. If it wasn't for him and the blessings that he had received and the actions that he committed when he was sold off into Egypt, they would have perished during the famine. So it's he who saved everyone, he who has the blessing. Now moving on to the sixth portion. Chapter 49 of Genesis, verse 27. Benjamin is a wolf, he will prey. In the morning he will devour plunder, and in the evening he will divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them and blessed them. Each man, according to his blessing, he blessed them. And he commanded them and said to them, I will be brought in to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which field Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for burial property. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. And there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field and the cave therein was from the sons of Heth. And Jacob concluded commanding his sons, and he drew his legs up into the bed and expired. and was brought in to his people. Chapter 50, verse 1. Joseph fell on his father's face, and he wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were completed for him. So are the days of embalming completed, and the Egyptians wept over him for 70 days. When the days of his weeping had passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, speak now in Pharaoh's ears, saying, My father adjured me, saying, Behold, I am going to die. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. So now please let me go up and bury my father and return. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father as he adjured you. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and all Pharaoh's servants, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went up with him. And Joseph's entire household, and his brothers, and his father's household, only their young children and their flocks and cattle did they leave in the land of Goshen. And chariots and horsemen also went up with him, and the camp was very numerous. And they came to the threshing floor of the thorn bushes, which is on the other side of the Jordan, and there they conducted a very great and impressive eulogy, and he made for his father a mourning of 7 days. The Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of the thorn bushes, and they said, This is an intense mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore they named it Abel Mitzrayim, Egypt mourns, which is on the other side of the Jordan. And his sons did to him just as he had commanded them. And his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and they buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which field Abraham had bought for burial property from Ephron the Hittite before Mamre. And Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father, after he had buried his father. Now Joseph's brothers saw that their father had died, and they said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and return to us all the evil that we did to him. So they commanded messengers to go to Joseph, to say, Your father commanded us before his death, saying, So shall you say to Joseph, Please forgive now your brother's transgression and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also went and fell before him, and they said, Behold, we are your slaves. But Joseph said to them, Don't be afraid, for am I instead of God? Indeed, you intended evil against me, but God designed it for good, in order to bring about what is at present to keep a great populace alive. So, we conclude the 6th portion. We learn about Benjamin. A wolf, he will prey in the morning, he will devour plunder, in the evening he will divide the spoil. So, definitely seems sort of like a hunter, one who's going to be leading the charge, and he will share with his brothers the splendors of plunder that come from his house. Those are all the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father spoke to them and blessed them. Each man according to his blessing, he blessed them. So he basically told them what they will have, just like it was done for all of him and his brother, as well as his ancestors, the blessings given to each before he passed on. He then also said, basically, make sure you bury me with my wife and my ancestors in the cave of Machpelah. So they all agreed to do it. And then once he dies, which is after he's done all he needs to do, Joseph weeps, and everyone weeps and mourns him. It takes 40 days to do a proper embalming, but in doing so, they do preserve the body well so that it can be transported. 70 days total are how long he is wept for in Egypt, and then after that, Joseph goes to Pharaoh and basically says, if I have found any favor in your eyes, please let me fulfill my father's dying wish and return him to where his ancestors are buried. And Pharaoh, of course, being the homie that he is, being Joseph's good friend and benefactor, is happy to say, do what you gotta do, my friend. Go fulfill your father's dying wish. So a huge convoy of not just the brothers and the people of Israel's house, but also of Pharaoh's people, all go, and except for the small children and the flock and cattle, they all make this huge trip. It's a great big eulogy that they do on the other side of the Jordan, and it's such a big deal that the Canaanites who are witnessing it, seeing these Egyptians, are honestly shocked. They've never seen something like this. Wow, these Egyptians are really emotional right now. So they named the area after that event of the Egyptians mourning at that location. And so basically they all fulfill the promise. He is buried with his forefathers. And then as they return, the brothers now conspire, oh man, now that our dad's gone, what if Joseph turns on us and gets revenge for what we did to him? So they come up with a scheme. They tell their servants to basically go and make up a story that their father told them to tell Joseph, hey, spare and forgive your brothers for what happened. Joseph cries. And it's not clear if the reason he's crying is because of the emotional attachment to this, or maybe it's because he's crying because, man, even after all this, they don't get it. Who do they think I am? But nonetheless, they turn themselves to him and say, we are your slaves. They prostrate before him, but he says, cut it out. Don't be afraid. Am I instead of God? Right? So, am I someone that you should be worshiping instead of the Lord? Yeah, you did plan to do evil to me. But guess what? That was the Lord's plan. Because of that evil, we are alive. So don't be afraid. I'm not going to turn on you. You're fine. Now we move on to the seventh and final portion, chapter 50, verse 21 of Genesis. So now, do not fear. I will sustain you and your small children. And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw children of a third generation born to Ephraim. Also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm going to die. God will surely remember you and take you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph adjured the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out of here. And Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him, and he was placed into the coffin in Egypt. Thus concludes this week's Torah portion. So Vayechi wraps up with a promise from Joseph, don't worry, I will take care of you, and I will take care of your children. And he is blessed to see several generations born. He gets to live to see his descendants born to his two sons, who are officially designated now the sons of Jacob, just as he is, but he gets to see his own flesh and blood born to Ephraim and Manasseh. So it's ultimately a good end to a long and beautiful life. But he asks for one last thing. He says that God will surely remember you, and after all, this is what he remembers after everything else, right? He remembers what the promise of the Lord has been. God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out of here. So, in other words, Joseph doesn't know when, but he insists that his people will bring him out of this land just as they did for Jacob. He will be returned to the land of his forefathers too. That is his parting wish, just as his father wished for himself. And so he was embalmed and placed into the coffin in Egypt. So on the subject of embalming for both Jacob and for Joseph, embalming is kind of significant, right? Because you preserve the body, which means thanks to this Egyptian practice, they're able to actually delay the burial of the corpse. Because again, embalming is very different from a normal decomposing corpse. So in essence, they're kind of being preserved for a later burial. And we'll find at some point in time, this significant request shall not be forgotten. Joseph is placed in the coffin, and that is where he shall lie in wait for the day for someone to fulfill his promise, his final request. So there we have it, the end of Vayechi, the end of And He Lived, the end of Jacob, and the end of Joseph, as well as a prophecy for all the blessings of the sons of Israel. We now know where their futures lie. That concludes this week's Torah portion. Overall, a very sentimental end where life choices are ultimately reflected in the blessings that are given in response to them. And of course, the elevation of Ephraim and Manasseh to being equal to that of their uncles, the designation of who the 12 tribes of Israel are, as well as what their lot will be in the future, and their destiny that they ultimately will fulfill. The blessings given to the children of Jacob, the blessings given to the sons of Joseph, now elevated to the sons of Jacob, and the future promise that Judah will hold the scepter over his brothers and be quite a powerful and respected house. That's quite a lot. So with that, we are now going to be getting ready for a pretty big pivot in the narrative now that these histories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have come to a close. Things will probably be getting pretty intense starting with the next Torah portion. So stay tuned for more, and be sure to tune in next time for the weekly Parashahcast. This has been Shmuel Moshe. Thank you for listening, and as always, please let me know what you thought in the review, comments, etc. Let us know what your thoughts are on the subjects that we've covered today, and I'd love to hear your opinions, as well as some help in deducing what things really meant. I am always relying on the English, right, rather than the Hebrew, so my interpretations are going to be limited by my own understanding and the quality of a translation, which ideally one can learn the Hebrew to really learn the text. In any case, that's all for now. This has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast, Torah portion Vayechi. We'll see you next time. Baruch Hashem.